This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. A lot of social media activity and a lot of calls so far this morning about the culture war as it is being prosecuted in football and basketball. An example, Colin Kapernick, Dr. Roosevelt, tweeting us. Recall that Kaepernick wore those police pig socks, but Goodell prevented football players from honoring the slain Dallas police officers. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of politics and sports, the intersection, yeah, it happens. And sports isn't insulated from the outside world. And that's why it's a legitimate discussion to talk about the politicization of football, the politicization of sports, when it started, the nature of it, what is being honored and what is being disrespected.
Well, certain tragedy. Sandy Hook. I remember it being at a Cubs game. We had a moment of silence for all the Sandy Hook victims. But then you had the 5 police officers slain, and there wasn't a moment of silence. So who decides what we honor and what we don't?
Well, and what a society extols, it begets. So this has real implication. Yeah, I understand the argument. People are, I don't pay any attention. I don't care about sports. I don't care about football. That's fine. You can not care. But sports, I get the whole, the bread and circuses for the hoi polloi that goes back to the days of Juvenile. I get it. But to pretend that sports isn't an integral part of culture and doesn't have enormous sway over the direction of our culture is to bury your head in the sand. And I don't think we want to do that either. In fact, according to celebrities like Stevie Wonder, don't just take one knee. Take 2 knees for America.
Tonight, I'm taking a knee for America. But not just one knee. I'm taking both knees.
Wow.
I hope you have knee pads on.
2 knees.
Both knees in prayer for our planet, our future, our leaders of the world, and our globe.
That's noted climatologist Stevie Wonder, who apparently also sings songs.
Yes.
So it just gives you a little sense of Hollywood. And then the controversy, we've talked a lot about the NFL. What about the NBA? Golden State Warriors, NBA champs, Steph Curry, the face of the Golden State Warriors, and frankly, face of the NBA, along with LeBron James right now. He made noise that he wasn't maybe so interested in going. So President Trump rescinded the invitation for the Golden State Warriors to come to D.C.
Yeah, and he did it via a tweet saying going to the White House is considered a great honor for a championship team. Stephen Curry is hesitating. Therefore, invitation is withdrawn, !
And then Steph Curry reacted to the withdrawal of that invitation.
It's surreal, to be honest. I don't know, why he feels the need to target certain individuals, rather than others. I have an idea of why, but it's kind of it's just kind of beneath, I think, a leader of a country to go that route. It's not what leaders do.
Mm-hmm. Do leaders insinuate racism where none exists, Steph?
I don't care what Trump said about the NFL. I kind of agree with that. But going after Stephen Curry and disinviting him, I thought was just childish and stupid. He should not have gotten involved in that. He was on a tweeter maniac fest this whole weekend.
It's his invitation. So
I know,
he's by
but
definition
there's always players
involved.
who don't go. Jake Arrieta didn't go because he's a Republican. He didn't like President Obama, so he didn't go.
Yeah.
That's fine, but to disinvite the team, it's a little childish.
Paul Marengoff over at Powerline Blog, I think, has it right. Steph Curry trying to have it both ways. Withdrawing the invitation was the right thing to do, I think, writes Mr. Marengoff. I think the Warriors, or at least the core players and their coach, didn't really want to go. If the team had taken a vote, it was contemplated, probably would have caused internal division. Meanwhile, Trump didn't want to suffer the indignity of having his invitation rejected outright. The solution, pull the invitation. He goes on to say, look, I agree the U.S. president shouldn't get involved in these, back and forth contests with celebrities, athletes, and the like, but Curry's being disingenuous. Trump targeted him because he's the face of the Golden State Warriors, not because he's black, as Steph Curry seemed to be intimating. For more on this topic and the larger issue of the state of play in professional sports, we're pleased to be joined by Steve Aschburner. He is a senior writer for NBA.com. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me on.
So what do you make of the Golden State Warriors controversy and what the president decided and how Steph Curry reacted?
Well, it starts, I guess. Well, it didn't start. It started with Kevin Durant saying he didn't want to go to the White House. He was the newest star member of the Warriors, and is considered now almost as much the face of that team as Curry. And then Curry, when asked about it, was basically he was hesitating. He was indicating that they were going to vote on it, and he hadn't made up his mind. But it was fairly clear the Warriors had they were going to decide not to go. There's no way that Kevin Durant's no and Curry's I don't know, that wasn't going to get outvoted by role players on that team.
Right.
So then you throwing around his exclamation points and making it focused on one guy, and you end up where we're at now. I agree that the trying to play it both ways. They want to. It sort of became I'm going to break up with you before you break up with me kind of
Yeah, right.
And they want to feel snubbed even though they were going to snub. So I almost want to see the White House get out of the championship team visits until, if ever, we sort of tamp down this fever pitch that sports has become regarding politics.
But, Steve, there's always a player who decides not to go, whether it be football or baseball or basketball, right?
It's often happened, in my understanding. And let's not forget, too, that there was a former Chicago Bull named Craig Hodges who felt that he got blackballed from the NBA when he wore a dashiki,
yeah, right.
And wanted to raise some issues on, when he went with the Jordan Pippen era Bulls. And that's been fine, but now, the times have moved along, and now everything has to be a show of unity. There are no individual decisions made. You're either with us or you're against us. And, that it was going to become a team thing. As I understand it, the Cubs went twice, right? They went at the very end of President Obama's tenure, and they went in the spring when they went to Washington with Donald Trump in the White House.
But they went twice just because they'll never win another World Series. So they got two bites at the apple.
Stop it.
That's kind of a unique situation there.
Oh, right. It's an anomaly. It doesn't happen.
That's right. Well, let me ask this. You've been a sports writer for a long time. How has the nature of your profession changed? Because we did a little look at one of my publications at the political affiliation, effectively by voting patterns, of 57 Chicago area sports journalists. And we heard over the weekend in The Score, Steve Rosenblum, a Tribune sports columnist, calling President Trump the fecal matter-in-chief, and Hub Arkush, Pro Football Weekly, saying he's a degenerative douchebag. And you've, of course, what's happened at ESPN with Jameel Hill and apologizing for having a live fantasy football draft that some people called a slave auction. So ESPN apologizes. The direct and purposeful shift left by ESPN, and then just the nature of sports journalism, which not dissimilar to news, political journalism, seems to be dominated by people with a particular worldview, and how that informs their coverage of sports when sports does intersect with politics.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I don't feel like the nature of my profession has changed. I do feel like the profession has changed and how it's practiced. I don't think what we should be doing is any different, but what we're seeing done is a lot different. And I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, politics is swamping a lot of things that it used to sort of consider off limits or areas that would fend it off and really didn't have to go there. I happen to think sports is best as a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, because, it's one of those where areas in our culture that might bring people of different stripes together. You might be sitting, cheek to cheek with a guy who's 180 degrees from you at a ball game, and just those few hours might be as much exposure as you get to someone from the other side.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a good thing to bring those people together. So if it becomes this is our sport and this is not your sport, and then other people want to take their wallets and go home, I don't think that that's a good thing. In terms of, sports media, I mean, let's be clear. A lot of people in sports media have a little bit of guilt that they're really not covering anything that's really that important. And we're the first people that we fill out our tax forms every year in occupation. Instead of putting sports writer, we'll put journalist. Mm-hmm. And you puff up a little bit. And people now in sports can puff up without. I mean, they don't have the first level of resistance. I mean, it goes on. It's obviously going on news sides. But if you're not covering politics, if you are covering politics, then someone will say, well, wait a minute now. You're not attending to both sides. You're a sports person. That really doesn't come up. You don't feel the pushback. You're just sort of free to, go in whatever way your emotions take you. And I think there's a lot of that involved here, too.
See, it's hard for me to hate Steph Curry because he always brings his Bible to the game. He's a devout Christian. On the shoes, he say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And
that's talking about hating Steph Curry, though. You disagree. You don't hate. I don't hate Steph Curry. I disagree with him.
But I've always been a big fan of his, and I think that the players and the fans are going to side with him on this one by not, going to the White House.
Well, I'll tell you, one thing. I mean, people forget that sports, in a lot of ways, pushes back against this stuff. In that, sports is a lot about leadership. We've all sort of accepted that sports is one of the few pure meritocracies left, right? Where, you're not hired because you're somebody's, country club buddy or because of any particular racial or ethnic background. You're hired and paid well because you can do the job. And people wonder whether crony capitalism or, affirmative action, they don't really raise their heads in sports. And, I think it really is blowing an opportunity. And I flash back to Michael Jordan, and I know there's been some controversy over whether he said it quite this way, but the old idea that Republicans buy sneakers too.
Yeah.
And do they really want to thumb their nose at 50% of the customer base?
Well, right. I mean, that the year-over-year decline in viewership for the NFL, and that's before everything that's happened over the last 72 to 96 hours. And also just even the posture that Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors are taking. I mean, there is residual detriment to that. And so, I mean, these certain guys are insulated no matter what. If the league folded tomorrow, they've still got tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, so they're insulated from it. But it does really tear asunder the foundation of sports, and it makes sports a front in the culture war. And I'm not sure that the owners and a lot of the players really understand the implications of what they're doing, particularly with what happened in the NFL yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with the NFL, it's like twofold. First off, I mean, I saw a stat this morning that 23% of the players didn't participate in the anthem if you count kneeling and sitting along with those who weren't out on the field for the anthems. That's 23%. When they get to 100%, let's say it's next week, what's next? What has to happen to get them up off their knees? There's no plan that I've really heard or seen in terms of talking with law enforcement agencies, having the facts and the data of what they're actually protesting. I don't know what's next. The other thing is if I was learned in journalism, if you say or do A and your audience, hears and sees B, the audience isn't wrong. So if people are seeing disrespect to America and the flag, and you're trying to, tell them something about, police encounters and racial inequality within those, there's a disconnect there, and somebody needs to polish their message a lot better.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point. What's the what do they want? What's the response? How do we remedy the whatever you're protesting? And in point of fact, this is all just virtue signaling. And now it's really just focused on, standing up to President Trump, even though all of this predates President Trump. But that's the way they're kind of trying to shift the focus and the discussion. It's us versus Trump, who's, not necessarily popular. But really what the fans are saying is it's us versus you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the divide that's taking place, and it could get greater, could get wider, and I think that some things will be lost. I mean, sports isn't important, except it is an opportunity for, like I mentioned, some of those things, lessons, and sort of a coming together of people you wouldn't normally be around, and it could get lost. Ultimately, there's a financial stake involved, but I'm not even thinking that far down the road. The NFL seems like the 800-pound gorilla that will weather pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And it has its own issues that has turned off fans in terms of brain trauma injuries and things like that. So, if they're picking a side here, I'm a little surprised that as an employer, the NFL and its teams have gone here in the sense that if you walk into a restaurant, you want the waiter to talk to you for 30 seconds or a minute about his political views before he hands you a menu. I don't know how many people would tolerate that. And I just think that when you're in uniform on the clock, keep that for your personal time. But that's not good enough these days because you have to use the soapbox that the media gives you.
He is, and oh, by the way, a lot of big corporations were big until they weren't. Steve Aschburner, he is senior writer for NBA.com. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, thanks.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.